Last month, we revisited some cool British singles released in August 1966. Now, it's time to do the same with September of that year. So without further ado, let's begin. September 1966 saw the release of this single by the Rolling Stones. The song, with its frantic horns and noisy and discordant guitars, is still one of the most way-out singles the Stones ever released, both from a lyrical and production point of view. The single got great reviews in the press. The New Musical Express wrote,
"Another fantastic disc from the Stones, with such a complexity of startling sounds that it will leave you breathless. The rhythm drives along with a fiercely compelling intensity, raw, earthy, and invigorating, and it's enhanced by punchy brass in the background. Mick is in great form on the vocal, and although it's difficult to catch much of the lyric, it's plainly as unconventional as ever. What a dazzler."
In the States, however, the cover of the single was quite controversial, and the song got mostly negative reviews in the press. Oddly enough, one of the few artists who defended the single in the American press was Frank Zappa. Zappa said, "Have You Seen Your Mother? Wasn't such a bad song. The song seemed to me to be the best way of saying something about a certain situation common in contemporary society. It's a pity that that was the only way the Stones could say it, but we've gone so far down that it was the only effective way. I think it was a good statement." The B-side, a song called Who's Driving Your Plane, was more conventional in style. But the production and lyrics were just as over the top as the other side.
It was your father who trained you and your mother who trained you to be so useless and shy.
The single reached number 5 in Britain and number 9 in the States.
I can't stand still 'cause you've got me going.
Another single that proved to be quite controversial was this 45 by the Troggs. The tune, which was written by lead singer Reg Presley, was banned by Rediffusion, who claimed that the lyrics were too sexy. In the States, the single was also banned from being played on several radio stations. And the same thing happened in Australia. The B-side was another good song called Gonna Make You.
Gonna make you all mine.
Despite the controversy, the single was very successful in Britain, reaching number 2 and remaining several weeks in the top 10. In the States, however, the lack of radio play affected sales, and the single stalled at number 43 according to Billboard.
I never saw a night so right for love. Never saw the stars so bright above.
The Byrds featured future Stones member Ronnie Wood on guitar, and this was their 4th and last single. At this point, the band had switched from Decca Records to Reaction, a label founded by Robert Stigwood. Stigwood decided to release this single as the Byrds in order to avoid confusion with the American Byrds. The Byrds released 4 excellent singles during their brief existence, but chart success always seemed to elude them, and this 45 was no exception.
Are you gonna say those magic words? Are you gonna say those magic words?
The B-side was a Ronnie Wood and Tony Monroe composition called Daddy Daddy.
I spin a world of sound.
Just like the other side, the song featured some great guitar by Ronnie Wood. Despite their success in clubs all over Britain, the band's inability to reach the charts resulted in the Byrds breaking up shortly after the release of this single.
I shout, but you can't hear me, and you don't care. Happy New Year, baby, you don't care. Happy New Year.
Another excellent single from September 1966 was this 45 by Beverly. Both sides of the single featured a stunning lineup of musicians consisting of Jimmy Page on guitar, John Paul Jones on bass, and Nicky Hopkins on piano. The A-side was a Randy Newman composition called Happy New Year.
The year is lined with promise, so greet it joyfully.
The interplay between Jimmy Page's guitar and Nicky Hopkins' piano was one of the highlights of the song. The B-side, which was written by Beverly herself, was another excellent song called Where the Good Times Are.
You can be sure you'll be able to score where the good times are.
The song featured some great fuzz guitar by Jimmy Page. The single went pretty much unnoticed when it was originally released, but it has become a cult favorite over the years, and it was even reissued by Fly Records a few years ago. Later in 1969, Beverly married British singer-songwriter John Martin. Many bands from the 60s only managed to record one single and then faded into obscurity. The Thoughts are one of these bands. The British band released their first and last single in September 1966. The A-side was a Ray Davies composition called All Night Stand. The sound was reminiscent of many of the mod bands that were emerging in Britain at the time. The song was well received by the music press, and the band even appeared on French television promoting the song. But despite getting some airplay on pirate radio stations, the song never charted.
Winter is here, end of the season.
Apart from All Night Stand, Ray Davies also wrote End of the Season for the Uglies. Later in 1967, the Kinks recorded their own version of the song, and the track was included on their album Something Else. And another Ray Davies song that was released in September 1966 was this track by Mo and Steve.
Oh, yesterday, girl, oh, what a day it's gonna be.
None of these singles managed to chart, but All Night Stand by The Thoughts has been featured on many compilations over the years, and it was even included on the second Nuggets box set.
No milk today, my love has gone away. The bottle stands forlorn, a symbol of the dawn.
By September 1966, future 10cc member Graham Gouldman had already written hits for bands such as the Yardbirds and the Hollies. And September 1966 saw the release of yet another Gouldman composition that became a bit hit. Unlike Herman's Hermit's previous singles, which were never taken very seriously by the British press, this one got excellent reviews. Disc magazine journalist Penny Valentine wrote,
"Written by Graham Gouldman, this has more than just a vague Hollies touch to it. Super clever words about the fact that he doesn't want any milk being tied up with losing his girlfriend. Someone has worked hard on the arrangement to give Herman his first really mature sounding record for ages, and his best big hit."
The song reached number 7 in Britain, and it also became a major hit in several European countries. In the States, however, Dandy by Ray Davies was released in its place with the same B-side. But No Milk Today became a moderate hit in the States later in 1967, when it was released there as the B-side to There's a Kind of Hush. But this wasn't the only Graham Gouldman composition that was released as a single in September 1966.
The cost of living's rising and it really is surprising. My boss came in to me today, said he's gonna raise my pay.
This song by the Downliners Sect was also written by Graham Gouldman. The track presented a departure from the band's usual style. The group usually specialized in tough rhythm and blues numbers. This tune, however, featured the band experimenting with folk rock. Record Mirror wrote,
"Song about problems of the workers, but with a strong beat and inventive sort of vocal work. Fringe-type chances, but again, worth hearing."
The B-side was more akin to the sort of material that they normally used to play.
And I could love you, baby, with everything I've got to give.
The single, just like all the previous singles by the group, failed to reach the charts.
Come on back, and I'll be good to you, girl.
By September 1966, many music fans saw British producer Joe Meek as a memory from the past. The producer hadn't had a top 10 hit since 1964, when the Honeycombs reached number 1 with Have I the Right. Out of all the singles that Meek produced in 1965 and 1966, the only 45 which managed to reach the top 30 was this record by The Crying Shame.
Be different, please stay.
The group went through a few lineup changes and changed their name to Paul and Richie and the Crying Shames. Joe Meek produced their first release under the new name. The A-side was a rather mediocre cover of September in the Rain, but the highlight here was the B-side.
Come on back now, a little daughter new girl.
This is yet another B-side that has become a cult favorite among fans of British singles from that era. The song has appeared on several compilations over the years, and it was also featured on this great compilation, which featured some of Meek's most way-out productions from that period. The single reached number 40 in Britain.
At night, I hear footsteps sound down the hall.
The Zombies were the sort of band that would always come up with great songs and singles. But unfortunately, most of their singles from that period failed to reach the charts. And this single from September 1966 was no exception.
Got to get a hold of myself. Got to make believe I don't care.
Journalist Penny Valentine wrote,
As usual, from this talented, underrated and in fact almost ignored British group, comes a well-made and beautifully competent record. Written in part by Clint Ballard Jr., this was originally recorded last year and is a fierce little song about how he is finding it so hard to face everything. Very desperate rendition by the lead singer. I'd like to say with certainty that this will be a hit, but they've made such good records in the past that have been overlooked, that I just don't know.
The single failed to chart.
Neighbor, don't worry what goes on in my home. Just leave me alone.
Prior to changing their name to Status Quo, Francis Rossi and company were known as the Spectres, and this was the first of 3 singles that they released for Piccadilly Records.
You're interfering with my life.
As usual with many singles from that period, the B-side was stronger than the A-side. None of their 3 singles managed to reach the charts, and the lack of success of their last single, which was a cover of this classic by the Blues Magoos, prompted them to change their name to Status Quo in early 1967.
I wanna be free. Wanna be free. Said I gotta be free. So now.
Another band that reached bigger fame and success when they changed their name was the VIPs. The group changed its name to Art in 1967, and then changed the name of the band again to Spooky Tooth in 1968. The VIPs were one of many British bands who moved abroad in order to avoid the competition that existed in Britain. In this case, the group moved to France and enjoyed moderate success there. Penny Valentine wrote,
I have long admired the VIPs in their way. This song by Joe Tex isn't really commercially great, but it does demonstrate the group's talent, which mainly lies in their lead singer, whose voice is a raving cross between Ray Charles and Eric Burdon.
The single didn't chart in Britain, but it became a minor hit in France. The VIPs actually released some decent singles in the 60s, and those of you who are interested in their career should definitely check out this compilation.
Gone from my mind. Oh, but slowly speaking.
The Night People were formed in Bournemouth in 1964, and this was their debut single. The A-side was a great bluesy number that seemed to be very influenced by bands like The Animals.
And the sweetest man.
The B-side was a good danceable mod number.
Stands behind me to give me power. Who thinks of me every minute of an hour? Nobody but you, babe.
This is one of the few singles from that period, which features a B-side that sounded more commercial and radio-friendly than the top side. In September 1966, releasing a slow bluesy number as the A-side was Commercial Suicide. And not surprisingly, the single went unnoticed and sank without a trace. The group released 8 singles during their 4-year existence and finally broke up in 1970.
It's no use me crying, there is no denying it's right. But thinking has ruined the feeling and we had to fight.
The Searchers welcomed September 1966 with this wonderful song written by the Hollies. The song, however, was also recorded by Paul and Barry Ryan. Their version was released as a single 2 weeks after the Searchers' 45.
Have you ever loved somebody? Don't you know just what it's like?
Funnily enough, their version of the song was produced by ex-Searchers drummer Chris Curtis, who left the Searchers in February 1966. Despite this ad claiming that the Hollies wrote the track for Paul and Barry Ryan, Graham Nash and Company actually wrote the song for the Everly Brothers. The Everlys were the first to record the track in May 1966.
Don't come back tomorrow and say what we did wasn't right.
The Hollies themselves recorded the song later in 1967, and their own version of the song was included on their album Evolution. The Searchers' version of the song reached number 48 in Britain, and the Paul and Barry Ryan version reached number 49.
From Monday to Friday you work for 40 a week.
Marmalade scored a few major hits in the late 60s, but their debut single was released in September 1966. The song seemed destined to become a hit. It was a good pop number with a catchy chorus and a strong melody, and it seemed like the perfect song for DJs to play on the radio.
'Cause it's all leading up to Saturday night.
The song actually got a fair amount of airplay on some pirate radio stations, and it was also well received in the press. Record Mirror wrote,
A story of teenage money problems, leading to the big night out. A commercial offering.
the single, however, failed to connect with the record-buying public, and it didn't mean a thing in the charts.
I stumbled over something. I think it was your love.
Here's another B-side that was way better than the A-side. This is yet another B-side that has been featured on several compilations over the years. Between 1966 and 1973, the Magic Lanterns released 11 singles with virtually no chart success. Their only hit was this soul pop number from 1968, which actually managed to reach number 3 in Canada and number 29 in the States.
One more record to go for the top of the hour. These are the Rolling Stones. Number 5 in the front, 50, Happy City Mother Baby.
I hope you enjoyed this trip back to September 1966. See you next time.